If you've spent any amount of time debating animal ethics, you've probably run into the name the trait argument. It aims to highlight the arbitrary nature of discrimination towards non-human animals and the absurd conclusions of our justifications for exploiting them. The argument comes in different wordings, but generally it can be phrased in the form of, what is the trait difference between humans and animals such that it's permissible to exploit animals but not to exploit humans? People will then cite a trait that grants humans moral worth. You highlight an example of a human who lacks that trait, and then you test them for consistency. Name the trait difference. I think it's wrong to exploit humans because we're more intelligent. Animals lack the same intelligence that we have, so it's okay to exploit them. Alright, but there are some examples of humans that have intelligences that are comparable to animals. Young children, people with degenerative brain diseases. Do you think it's okay to exploit these people just because they're less intelligent than you? No?
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
We can then conclude that a lack of intelligence is in fact not the reason it's morally permissible to exploit animals. You can repeat this process for any answer. Inability to communicate, not having friends or family. We can always hypothesize a human who lacks one of these traits, and it always sounds absurd to permit exploiting them on those grounds. Generally, I like name the trait, and it's one of the main reasons that I decided to stop exploiting animals, but there are some answers that can prove problematic for it. Well, I think the trait difference is that we're human, and they're not human.
Perfect.
This answer certainly does defeat the follow-up question. Yeah, well, what if we found a human who wasn't human? Ah, fuck. There are some rebuttals that I think most people would accept, though. Firstly, it's circular. You're essentially saying humans are worth more because they're human. It doesn't really answer the question. Most people would reject that reasoning when it's applied elsewhere. I could, for example, say people with ginger hair deserve greater moral consideration because they have ginger hair. But trust me, no one thinks that. This is precisely the rationale behind other forms of discrimination, like racism or sexism. If we reject supremacy there, why would we accept it here? Another example might be something like, yeah, sure, some humans lack our level of intelligence, but they belong to the human group, right? Humans have more intelligence on average, animals have less intelligence on average. This could also take us to some weird places. Consider this. If a virus spread throughout humanity and left 51% of us with considerably less intelligence, would that dissolve human rights? Would the other 49% lose their moral worth because they now belong to a group whose average intelligence was the same as animals? It seems absurd that our own moral worth is now tied to the mental capacities of someone else. So far, these rebuttals require some kind of common ground. They rely on people not discriminating on arbitrary grounds, they rely on people not biting bullets like racism is fine or a virus could wipe out human rights. But what happens if you meet someone who calls these kinds of assumptions into question? Moral anti-realism is the belief that there are no objective moral facts. Anti-realism comes in many forms, but I think each one warrants a different response. For the record, you could just debate anti-realism itself, but this isn't ideal because 1, it would require that you're a moral realist, and 2, debating meta-ethics will make you want to die. So generally, I find it most productive to try to squeeze out a rationale to be vegan that's compatible with their meta-ethical position. Probably the most common anti-realist position we encounter is subjectivism, which is the belief that moral propositions can have truth value, it's just that that value is determined by our own subjective attitudes. This doesn't necessarily defeat name the trait. For example, if the subjectivists believed that they ought not discriminate arbitrarily, name the trait would still stand. Assuming the subjectivist believes that they ought hold consistent beliefs, they're still subject to consistency tests. But what if they don't? And what if they think morality is just a load of bullshit? Once in a full moon, you might meet someone who thinks that we should disengage from moral discourse entirely. Someone who believes that there is no such thing as right and wrong. If they don't believe in any oughts, and they can just do what they want, does name the trait fail? Well, yeah. I once met an error theorist, which means he believes that there are no such thing as moral properties, and we're under no obligation to do or not do anything. When I used name the trait, he said I'm assuming that he needs a trait difference to justify his discrimination. And he was right. Under error theory, he's not wrong to discriminate arbitrarily, because there's no such thing as wrong. So, what do we do now? These people are rare, especially if you don't spend a lot of time on Discord. But if you do encounter one, name the trait isn't really going to get you anywhere. The best course of action, I would say, is either to just drop the conversation or try to convince them of some of the more selfish reasons to be vegan. It's good for the environment, it's good for our health. You could show them that part in Game Changers where veganism gave them huge boners. It's frustrating to run into arguments like this, but we have to remember that moral discourse itself comes with some assumptions that not everyone holds, and we need to adjust our arguments in order to cater for this. Whew, got a little into the weeds there, so let's just reset the tone. That's better. So how does name the trait work out when doing vegan activism? Does it work? And when should we use it? I've been doing a bit of street outreach for a while now, and I've found that it's important to pick and choose exactly when to use name the trait. There are two types of people I would say it struggles with. One is the Discord neckbeard from earlier, and the other is irrational people. I've had conversations with people before who got very upset when I used name the trait. For example, they might think that you're saying humans with lower intelligence are animals, which, considering they see them as subhuman, would be an insult. That isn't what name the trait is saying at all, of course, but really hearing what we're saying does require a certain level of detachment that not everyone has. If I can sense that a person might be uncomfortable with this kind of comparison, I'll usually swap out humans for dogs. Most people wouldn't approve of the farming of dogs, and the lack of a relevant trait difference is even more apparent. I resent that we live in a world where people misunderstand what you're saying and they fly off the handle, but we do live in that world, and it's more productive to play by its rules. So generally, I think Name the Trait does a good job of highlighting human supremacy. We just have to know its limitations and pick our moments for using it well. The good news is, even without it, there are plenty of good reasons to stop exploiting animals.